Welcome to the Content Podcast, conversations with Silicon Valley's creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates.
Hello, this is Usha.
Today we talk with Usha Srinivasan. She's the founder and president of Sangam Arts and Mosaic, Silicon Valley. Hey Usha, how you doing? This is Daniel.
Hi, Daniel. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you for taking time amidst your busy schedule to be able to talk on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to hear just your journey of starting Sangam Arts and just seeing how that all came about. But before we do that, could you give me a little, you have kind of like a history in electrical engineering. How did you, because you first came to Texas and then you ended up coming to Stanford. How did that all come about?
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate this opportunity to be on this podcast and to speak with you about Sangam. To kind of my journey to where I am today, I came to the United States in 1990 to actually pursue a PhD in electrical engineering. I went to upstate New York, Rensselaer Polytechnic. And, being from southern India and having never experienced anything colder than 65 degrees to go to upstate New York, like Troy, New York, it was great. The fall was fantastic. And the first time I saw snow, I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome.
Right, yeah.
And then by the time December came around and, I was like, when is this white stuff going to stop? And it's depressing. And so it was, and so I basically kind of commuted my PhD and, graduated with a master's and went to Texas. For a job, right after I graduated, and I spent 4 years there where I got my green card, and then decided that I wasn't really feeling this whole engineering thing. So even though I worked as an application software engineer, I was I felt like I wanted to do something else. And a great way to pivot from anything to anything else is to go get an MBA.
Right,
so, and that's how I landed up in Stanford. And by then I'd been married for 4 years and my husband and I moved out here. And I did about 15 years after I graduated Stanford. I was in a very kind of typical high-tech product management job, worked my way through the ranks. And my last corporate gig, I was leading entertainment products at a company that is now called Rovi. It used to be called Macrovision.
Oh, okay.
And, I enjoyed it. It was great career progress. But in terms of, where I found myself around 2012 was I had 2 kids. I was in my, early 40s by then. And my husband had a job that was pretty demanding and required a lot of travel. I had young kids and old parents who were living with me. So, I found myself kind of, figuring out what I want to do and whether, I wanted to pivot and do something else. Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to have the ability to make that choice. So I kind of slowly phased out from my corporate gig, did some consulting for a while. And right around this time, I started to kind of look around for a bit, and just see where what does it mean to belong to this new country? Because like a lot of immigrants, especially those who come here specifically to attend school, you often don't really think about the kind of the long-term implications of your move.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I came here very specifically to go to grad school. And that's all I thought about. Take your GRE, get into a good school, get a research assistantship. The rest of it, who knows? We don't care. We figure it out. Right.
Right. Yeah. Were you kind of thinking that you would go back to India? Was that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And, a lot of people come with that notion. Right. And I was no different. I came here very explicitly to go to school. And I fully expected to kind of go back and pick up where I left off. And what you don't realize is the tide carries you forward. And in the meanwhile, the India that I left behind didn't exist anymore pretty soon, right?
Sure, yeah.
I woke up, I came up and when I was so heads down with my career, and then suddenly I paused and took a look around, and you find that, especially because this was in the 90s and early 2000s, tremendous changes in India, like in terms of, the whole high tech boom and
Yeah.
what that meant for the way of living. Of course, in the meanwhile, you have a lot of your grandparents' generation pass away.
Right.
And so you find yourself in this space where you suddenly there's no home to go back to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're here and you haven't quite yet accepted that this is your new home.
Right. Yeah.
But having children forces you to confront that in a very real way, right? Because this is the only home they know.
Yeah.
And so, you get tunnel vision, especially being in high tech in Silicon Valley. You're in this bubble and you just are not paying attention to anything that's happening around. So when I stepped out of that bubble, all of a sudden, it hit me, and I had to really kind of come to grips with this. What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be Indian American?
Yeah.
Do we belong? Do we really feel like we belong? And,
Yeah. Would you say, did
and
you feel like, especially like, for two things for you, definitely being a woman, being,
mhm,
an immigrant to the United States,
mhm.
how did that experience for you? Did you feel that in the tech world, being a woman, there was a little bit of, I don't know.
No, oddly enough, and this is something that's very counterintuitive. I think, um, first of all, I have to say that being an Indian immigrant, we benefit tremendously from the hard work of other communities that came before us. So the history of Indian immigration in large scale to the US is largely written after 1965, right?
Yeah.
That was when the Hart-Celler Act was passed. And what people don't know is that's a direct kind of offshoot from the civil rights movement. It was
Hmm.
also because the country was in the middle of the Cold War and there was a real need for engineers and
Sure.
scientists and
Okay.
people to come here. So that's why we were allowed to come here, not because there's something inherently superior, but as we felt, so they were picking people with the potential, people that already had all the things that are required to succeed over here, right? We come
Yeah.
here with obviously language is not a problem. We have great solid basic degrees in engineering and science.
Yeah.
And then when we come here, one of the things that I found is we get the best of both worlds. In Silicon Valley by this time, um, we had kind of plenty of other people that had gone before us, also women. I'm not trying to downplay the
Sure.
problem with being a women
Right.
engineer, but I would say it wasn't any more difficult for South Asian women. um,
Yeah.
we had the degrees, we were able to get in. Sure, there's issues around promotion and all those kind of
And wage or
just
something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of that still existed, but it's
Yeah.
not. I wouldn't say it was especially hard for us. If anything, one thing that I noticed is because of certain cultural artifacts, right? The fact when I all through my childbearing age, I constantly had either my parents or my in-laws at home with me
Yeah.
helping take care of my babies.
Sure. Yeah. The
Okay.
community. Yeah. Yeah.
And we never had to, I never had to make the tough choices that some of my white sisters and brothers or people from other communities need to make,
Yeah.
which is to kind of, I don't want to outsource child rearing. So I'm going to have to quit or step aside or step off the treadmill to take care
Yeah.
of my kids because I had, grandmas and grandpas at home taking care of mine.
Yeah. That's great.
So, that was a great asset. So I would say that um, yeah, I didn't really face. I mean, being in product management at that point in the late '90s, early 2000s, were heady times. This is the dot-com bubble.
Right.
There was tremendous opportunity, tremendous mobility. We were constantly being recruited by competitors.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's the thing.
a
I
lot
mean,
of
everybody's experience is a little bit different. And you do hear some women, really saying that they felt a real kind of like glass ceiling and those kind of
yes,
things. So I
and,
think it's
I'm not denying that exists at all.
sure,
It's
of
just
course.
that my personal journey, I didn't hit the glass ceiling yet,
Right. Yeah.
and it just so happened maybe I lucked out because that's very real, right? We
Yeah.
do know, women make just what 70 plus cents to a dollar that men
Right.
make,
Yeah. It's
and there are
crazy.
very real constraints. So
Yeah.
I
Now
I
when
just
you were
go
growing
ahead.
up, because you were engineering, and it's kind of a stereotype, right? I mean, I hate to kind of
Yes,
right
no,
of
no, no, it's true.
Indian engineer, and so were
Mm.
your parents, or what was in the community that kind of like pushed you that? Was it something you really thought you wanted to do, or was it more of a cultural
No, no, I'll
community?
tell you what it was. I'll tell you what it was. Um, in India, when I grew up, of course, in the 70s and 80s, the surest way for you out of poverty
Okay.
was to have an engineering or a medical degree, right?
Yeah.
Those were the two things that kind of guaranteed you a livelihood. And I was fortunate, I didn't have any brothers, and my parents were very, very progressive. And my father, in particular, was determined to make sure that his daughters were fiercely independent and equipped in every way.
Yeah.
Because normally, for the kind of society that I grew up in, the community I grew up in, girls were raised to be daughters, sisters, wives, and
Yeah.
mothers,
Right.
right? And that
Yeah.
was kind of the norm back then. But to
Yeah.
my father's credit, even though he didn't have like advanced degrees, he was a father first, and he was the ultimate feminist, right? And he was
Yeah.
very aware of kind of women getting trapped in bad marriages
Yeah.
and kind of all of that. And he was determined not to let his daughters go through that. And same
That's
thing with
awesome.
my mom. My mom's a school teacher, so even though they raised us in a very conservative, kind of very sheltered environment, when I think about the sacrifices they made to allow me and my sister to leave the country
Yeah.
at an age, at 21, when I came to the US, I took my very first airplane flight ever.
Right. Well.
And I had never spent a single night away from my family. If it wasn't
Wow.
my parents, it was my grandparents or aunts. I never lived by myself.
Yeah.
I was not raised to actually go out there into the world and live by myself. I was raised with the idea that I would, get like a job in a bank or something like that. And then, I would get married to somebody who lived close by and life would go on. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when I showed an interest in getting into engineering and I managed to get into some of these competitive schools, and then later on you hear about others about the opportunities in America, and then my father and my mom, to their credit, didn't stop us, even though I'm sure it was just absolutely terrifying to them to
Right. To
send
have
their
you
kids.
move. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
what did you think with the first when you stepped off the plane and I guess it was New York, right, to begin your trip?
yeah, yeah.
What was that like? The wide-eyed 21-year-old?
Yeah. Yeah, you're going into a university town is a little different than if I just kind of
Yeah.
gone into a city, right? So we're Troy, New York. It's a relatively small school. It's an engineering campus, lots of international students,
Yeah.
and so. And I also, my sister had come there the previous year, and she was going through her PhD. So I did have somebody
Okay.
there,
Yeah.
right? And so, but nothing. So the university experience is a little bit kind of different. I would say though, within a year of coming here, I went out to Dallas and actually got an apartment for myself.
Yeah.
I was so clueless; I couldn't drive. But I had no fear because I didn't know enough to fear, right?
Right. Sure.
you
Too
know, I
naive to. Yeah.
Oh
No.
my God,
Yeah.
I know. I didn't even know which neighborhoods to avoid to get an apartment. So I found an apartment in a neighborhood that the only place I could afford it.
Yeah.
And later on, people told me, "What the heck are you thinking?" So
Sure. Sure.
so some of that is just kind of ignorance is a bliss. So yeah, I mean, I think what happened to me is, and this is something that the single-minded focus
Yeah.
on a particular pursuit, right? Whether it's getting your master's degree or I need to get my green card, I need to do well on my job.
Yeah.
Getting a green card, going from a visa to a green card, especially back then in Dallas, you needed to prove that you're worth it,
Yeah.
right? So having that single-minded focus kind of you made everything else recede into the background.
Yeah.
And I was thinking just today, now I'm so up to my eyeballs in elections and paying
Sure.
attention to all of this stuff.
Yeah.
When I came there, this is 92 elections. Ross Perot was a big deal in
Oh
Dallas.
yeah.
And,
In Texas. Yeah.
I didn't even know about the parties and how they differed, right?
Yeah.
It didn't even, so I think I spent a lot of time in that state of tunnel vision, pursuing one milestone after another, well into the 90s. Because once I got my green card, I was like, I need to go to business school. I got to business school. I was like, I need to find a job.
Yeah.
I literally didn't step off the treadmill until I was well into my 30s and my kids had arrived.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was when I truly started to kind of grapple with these notions of belonging and starting to see, okay, this is my home. These
Yeah.
are my people. Everybody around here is my people.
Yeah.
And that's when I kind of started to realize that there are some issues we need to address. Because remember, I came to Stanford in '95, and when I came in '95, we were still in Silicon Valley about 65% white population,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
In the intervening 30, 25 years, the demographic changes have been so phenomenal,
Right.
in terms of the numbers, the diversity, the trend to diversity is increasing. And at the same time, so a lot of us over here are kind of still figuring out where we belong, where do we belong, right?
Yeah.
And that was the motivation behind starting Sangam. I first started Sangam in 2013. And
Yeah.
in 2016, I met my partner, Priya Das,
Right.
who has been very much who's the co-founder of this initiative that we started called Mosaic.
How did you guys meet? How did you meet?
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
it's an interesting story. So I was presenting. By that time, I was already kind of grappling with this idea of building community, building bridges between cultures using the arts.
Yeah.
And I was presenting a program that featured an Indian classical dancer and a Cambodian classical dancer,
Right.
because both of those art forms had their roots in the temples of India, right? So it's kind of a pretty easy connection to make, even though they manifest quite differently. The movements are very different. And one of them has evolved very differently along kind of more along the lines of Buddhism, and the other has stayed true, in kind of deeply rooted in Hinduism and Hindu mythology. And Priya was an arts critic
Oh,
for
okay.
India Currents.
Okay.
She was a freelancer, yeah. So she interviewed me
Okay.
to write a feature on the article, and we were talking about it. And she has a similar path, right? So she came here and was working in high tech as a program manager, and she also was very passionate about the arts and was also thinking about the same issues around, where do we fit in, where how do we kind of expand our spheres of influence and learn more about others, and how do we kind of quote unquote become American. And
Sure.
so when we got together, we had this big aha moment. And I think it
That's
really, it
good.
really was. And it's just and I think that it kind of became obvious to us that this model of social integration that we've held, as being kind of the standard in America for the longest time, this whole notion of melting pot,
Right.
right? The notion that you can come here from anywhere in this world, any race, culture, religion, and in this crucible of democracy and freedom can become American.
Right.
And that the whole notion, I think, it held reasonably well. I mean, completely, if you set aside the fact that we had indigenous people here, and of course we had slaves brought here against their
Right.
will,
Totally.
for everybody else, this notion made sense because most of the immigrants in the first four waves of immigration came here from Western Europe
Yeah.
or Northern Europe, kind of fleeing famine or persecution or war, or seeking better opportunities that were the result of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
But they all came here with one-way tickets, right? Seldom to
Right.
go back.
Yeah.
And because they were Judeo-Christian, and they were, white largely,
Yeah.
it wasn't impractical to expect them to give up some of their unique traits to become American in this melting pot.
Sure. Yeah.
And in a generation or two, their kids were indistinguishable from anybody else.
Right. Yeah.
But with the fourth, and the fifth wave after 65, you had more people coming here from Latin America and Asia. And the truth is, my kids, they can change their names and they can give up eating curry, but they will still be asked, where are you really from?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're from Santa Clara. That's where they're from.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But therein lies the problem. The problem that and it isn't so much that people are out there saying you're not American enough. It's sometimes we self hyphenate, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I have this origin story that I tell about Mosaic, which is my daughter was in a STEM school actually off of Moore Park, a school in San Jose.
Hmm.
In sixth grade, she came home one day and she was super excited about something. And she said, Amma, there's this Asian kid in my class, blah, blah, blah. And I stopped her and I go, what do you mean Asian kid? You know India is in
Yeah,
Asia, right?
right. Yeah,
And she just sort of looked at me, and I, because I didn't grow up here, I didn't realize that they say Asian and they mean like Far East or
right. Yeah,
Southeast Asian. And then we started talking about all the other kinds of Americans in their class. And she said, well, we have South Asians, we have a couple of Mexican Americans, we have no African Americans. So I said, well, who is
right.
American in your
Yeah,
class?
yeah.
And she said, well, she thought for a minute and she said, that would be Isabel. And but then she corrected herself and said, but Isabel, her parents are here from Ireland and she
Oh,
goes
how
back
funny.
next year,
No.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And my mind was blown. So you have kids self-hyphenating
Right.
and
Yeah.
conferring the all-American identity based on simply how somebody looks,
Yeah.
right?
It's funny how that even just subconsciously gets in
Yes,
there. Yeah. Yeah. So,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So, I do want to transition to, now I'm probably going to say it right. How do you say it?
Sangam, Sangam, yeah,
Sangam. It's a little
yeah.
bit more of the Sangam. And that
Yes.
actually literally means come together. Is that right?
Yes,
Is that kind
Sangam in Sanskrit means confluence,
of
and it's
confluence?
usually used in the context of rivers, right?
Okay.
Triveni Sangams, and they have some kind of sacred and holy connotations where, a lot of times there'll be multiple rivers that meet in a place, and those typically have religious significance as well. But the idea behind Sangam was initially, I was still very much rooted in Indian diasporic arts and very focused on expanding the reach of the arts from the diaspora to the broader community.
Right.
And so when I started Sangam, for example, I approached the San Francisco Ethnic Dance Festival and was able to convince them to host all 8 classical Indian dance forms and one of
Wow.
the in the festival in 2014. But then they invited me to be on the board, and it was while I was on their board that I realized that the experience of the Indian diaspora is not unique, right? Just as we pride ourselves on our rich and varied heritage,
Yeah.
every other community here has, rich, wonderful
Yeah.
artistic forms of expression. And the problem is that we all practice that within our silos,
Right. Yeah.
right? And somehow, quote unquote, mainstream arts is just kind of something that we think of when we think of like the ballet, the symphony, and
Yeah. The
the Eurocentric
European. Yeah.
arts,
Yeah.
right? And the truth is, we all belong, and that's the beauty of the mosaic. Is every little tile, regardless of its shape or size, is valuable and beautiful on its own. But it's what we create together when we come together that is glorious and all American.
Yeah. So would
So
you say that that segment originally
Sangam,
started Sangam? Yeah, sorry.
yeah, I know it's a
Originally
little,
started to kind of like focus on kind of Indian culture and Indian
yes,
art
that
form.
was initially, yeah,
And then you
yeah,
kind of, as you were on that board, you kind of like saw the wait a second, like you're seeing these silos,
yes,
and then is that where like the idea of mosaic then
yes,
came out, right?
exactly. And I'll tell you what else, the School of Arts and Culture, I was new to the whole art and culture scene, right? I was very much just fresh off the tech board.
Yeah, you're
And
yeah,
so I'm like, okay, now I'm going to start this organization. And I have to say that Silicon Valley Creates and School of Arts and Culture were very much, instrumental in helping us kind of take this notion of mosaic
yeah,
and animate it and get it socialized in the environment. And I'm proud to say that in the past 4 years, we've made tremendous inroads.
yeah,
Right now, Sangam is fairly well known in the Silicon Valley arts and culture landscape, and I would
yeah,
definitely draw a straight line from where we are today to my joining the Multicultural Arts Leadership Institute, which was something that was formed by Roy Hirabayashi from
yeah,
San Jose Taiko, Tamara Alvarado, and so we have a very, and of course, Connie Martinez was part
yeah,
of making Mali happen. So these are all people that were very much instrumental, these people and organizations,
yeah,
in kind of helping us incubate this idea, flesh it out, make the kind of connections that we needed, the partnerships. That allowed us to kind of, test out different ideas
yeah.
about what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, what is
Um,
some of the stuff that you did? Because so Sangam is kind of like the organization, and then
Yes.
Mosaic, is that the programs? Is that's kind
So
of
that's the
are the
initiative.
events? Okay.
Yeah. So and to be and I'm going to let you in on something that we haven't quite announced yet, but we are in the process of actually changing the name to avoid confusion. So we are changing Sangam Arts to Mosaic America,
Okay.
because truly, we have Mosaic Silicon Valley, but our thinking is that eventually many parts of America will experience what we are experiencing
Yeah,
here
that's
in
great.
Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And so we hope that we can prove in this kind of cultural innovation here in Silicon Valley, and then use it as a way to kind of spread the message and have other people adopt the model.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
so yeah, so in terms of what we did, so a Mosaic, our very first large, we had a Mosaic Silicon Valley event in 2016, right before the last election,
Right.
where we actually brought together, that was our launch event, right? We brought together 60 plus artists representing 9 or 10 different cultural traditions.
Yeah.
And we presented them kind of like in this daisy chain. You have one art form, like the flamenco came over, and they did their bit, and they were joined by a Haitian drummer, the percussion providing the common thread, and then
Yeah.
that morphed into something else. So it was this non-stop, seamless 60 minutes of music and dance,
Hmm.
one morphing into the other, kind of. Since then, we've done several things, including the very first folk festival, which we did at School of Arts and Culture. We had over 150 artists from 12 cultures. It was very well received,
Yeah.
because in addition to what we showed up on the stage, we had that celebration spill into the plaza.
Yeah.
And we had people in the pavilion dancing, and incredible video of, the hula dancers kind of, working with folk dancers from an Indian community, and the samba dancers, and
Yeah.
Brazilian dancers interacting with other kids, the Chinese dancers, and so on. So this whole notion of this experiencing things together is what creates a sense of community.
Yeah, that's great.
And yeah, so I think we've had a lot of success. We have also had some very critical learnings along the way.
Yeah, like
One of the
what?
things, yeah. So one of the things that we realized is, for a small organization that is grassroots and is trying to bring about big change, it is a huge lift for us to, get a big theater and do the tech and do the
Sure.
marketing and get people to come to
Right. Yeah.
experience these arts, which are, not very well known to people, right? So if I tell people, come and watch this show, it's going to feature 12 different cultures doing blah, 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 they just don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
So instead, what we are now doing is commissioning works that are intercultural, that require artists to come together and over a period of time learn about each other's traditions and co-create, like evening length performances, or maybe 15-minute performances.
Yeah.
And then we take it to where people already gather for other reasons,
Yeah.
right?
Great. Yeah.
So, for example, the San Jose Museum of Art has been a fantastic
Hmm.
partner and have allowed us to use their space. And we have a great mutually beneficial relationship, right? We oftentimes will bring programs like the Third Thursday program to San Jose Museum, where the performing arts that we bring there is intercultural, but it is also very much tied thematically to whatever is on exhibit at that
Right.
point.
Yeah.
Similarly, we're working with San Jose Jazz. We have
Yeah.
the city of Sunnyvale kind of had us come in and program their State of the City event. Montalvo Arts, we did a Mosaic Montalvo for them,
Yeah.
because
Would you?
there's a
Yeah.
recognition.
Would you say? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but would you say like then for Mosaic? I mean, because I think what you were kind of saying is like in the beginning it was kind of more of a here's a showcase of this kind of
Mm-hmm,
culture art, and here's a now next up is
mm-hmm,
this, and then and
mm-hmm.
now what you're talking about is actually seeing what happens when you bring maybe these
Yes,
two different cultures together and let them
yes.
create in their relationship something new,
Ab-
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is very important.
Yeah.
Creating cultural safaris
Yeah.
is not important anymore, right? It may have had its time and place, when
Sure.
we did indeed have one majority that had the audience and the power and the resources,
Yeah.
and they were trying to make space for people on the margins to come in, right?
Yeah.
That made sense back then. But right now, we are all part of this mosaic,
Yeah. So
right?
it's
And we
truly, if
all,
truly a melting pot, then there would be this different form that would come out, right? Rather than being
Yes,
these silos. Now, so I have a
exactly.
question though with that though, is like you talked about, like when you come over from a different culture and you're here, what are the aspects where you become, a part
Hmm.
of the culture, and then there are things that you give up. Do you feel
Yeah,
like, I'm just kind of, this is just off the top of my head, just,
yeah.
do you feel that by doing that, like bringing the two cultures together, is there something that people would be giving up from their culture, do you think, or?
Well, I think that I don't know that you shouldn't have to, right? I mean, I
Right.
think that's and I do think that some communities probably have to fit in. Whether it's some people probably feel the pressure not to dress a certain way, or
Yeah.
not to practice their faith openly or stuff. That
Sure.
still happens, but for me, I think it was more about adapting
Sure.
to include our community, right? So the way
Yeah.
we
Okay.
celebrate certain festivals or certain things now, I try and kind of adapt it so that I can invite my friends and others from other cultures to participate and feel like they can play a role in it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there's a need to give up, right? The only thing you give up truly is your allegiance
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
foreign country, right? Like if I have to take up arms against India, God forbid, I will, because this is my country now, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, you shouldn't have to give up anything, right?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I think even for me, being kind of by culture is like there is this kind of thing that where you feel like sometimes, well, I need to be this culture or that culture, but you can actually
Hmm.
have this meshing of the two and
Yes,
still respect and have identity and love for
yes,
the individuals. And I think
yes,
that's some of the
yes,
tension that you see within our countries that people want, you
absolutely.
know,
And I think one of the problems is the price of belonging, and I think back to
yeah.
my
Hmm.
days in high tech. People talk about diversity and inclusion and belonging. When you think about what we are doing through Mosaic is essentially to move communities from diversity to inclusion to belonging,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So you talk about that usually in a corporate context, but when you think about what people, regardless of what the policies say, I'll tell you what I felt as an Indian American. But well, I wasn't quite an American then, but an Indian immigrant went into this space. We left big chunks of our identity at the door when
Yeah.
we entered the workplace. We
Sure.
didn't talk about, a lot of the cultural aspects. I didn't wear my traditional clothes
Right.
because there was this unwritten rule that this is the dominant culture
Right.
and you need to conform to that to belong, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the beauty of a mosaic that we have in mind is that the shape or the image that the mosaic is creating is not is not known or established ex ante, right? It's not something that you already know. I'm going to create a peacock.
Right.
So all the pieces that come into this peacock are what I need. Everybody else is going to be left behind. The beauty of the mosaic is it morphs to accommodate everybody,
Yeah.
right? And makes the most of it. The problem, I think, what the people forget when they talk about belonging is, what does it mean to belong?
Right.
Diversity is you have enough people of different, people use these shortcuts to describe like what is diversity and inclusion belonging. People say like,
Percentages or
it's like,
something. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or it's like, being invited to a party versus having a good time. And I like to take that one step further and say it's being invited to a party, having a good time and feeling comfortable enough to pick the music and invite more people of your own, right?
Yeah.
To come and join, right? That's
Yeah.
belonging.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think we to be very fair, and this is where I think being Indian American, both Priya and I talk about this a lot, really has benefited us because India has many, many, many problems, some of which are truly ugly, and we need to change it. One problem you do not have in India, you don't have people walking around saying there is a Punjabi Indian, here's the Telugu Indian, there is a Tamil Indian. No, because our notion of national identity is not predicated on how somebody lives, eats, prays,
Hmm. Yeah.
which none of that. Because we have been able to develop a national identity that does not require on things being the same, right? Diversity is very much part of our kind of DNA.
Yeah.
But to be fair, we have had centuries to develop that competency, right? Back in India, because
Right.
the invasions, the
Right.
colonization,
Yeah.
all of that happened over centuries. You're talking about huge changes here in America, especially places like Silicon Valley, that have happened in 2 or 3 decades,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So there's not enough time for people to kind of develop that cultural competency.
Yeah. So, it's interesting as you're speaking. I know that your initial movement to this was to be involved in the arts and kind of like that
Yeah,
artistic expression. But when I hear you, it's like you're really shaping culture, is what I really feel. You're a community
that's
builder, right? How
yeah.
would you describe even yourself and what you're doing then?
Yeah. So I do think that I am kind of a quote unquote culture worker, right? An
Yeah.
All American culture worker. And I'm trying to strengthen community.
Yeah.
And you made such an astute observation. Arts was the most convenient, the least threatening, most accessible way for us to do that,
Yeah.
right? And we started there, and it's proven to be hugely successful because artists make tremendous cultural ambassadors,
Yeah.
right? And the artists that we work with typically are not mere performers. We all know those artists who are fantastic performers, but they haven't really put a lot of thought into the historical context of their art.
Sure.
And they have not looked around them to
Hmm.
see, what else is out there, right? They're very much focused inward. What we look for in artists are people who can be ambassadors for their art, but they can talk about, but they're all American, right? So we love to bring artists together who are all American and just happen to be practicing art forms that originated elsewhere.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
And and having grown up over here, being able to read music, all of these things make them uniquely qualified to create something together. And it's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to
That's
behold,
great.
right? But to your point about culture work, what we also realize is, well, arts is very core and central to what we do. There are a lot of things that we can do through other mediums, right? Whether it's through film, through discussions,
Yeah.
colloquia, through having conversations in libraries
Yeah.
and universities, and those are things that we're working on right now. In fact, we have a brand new series called Making the Mosaic, and that is going to be exploring this notion of belonging. What does it
Awesome.
mean to belong?
Yeah.
And starting all the way from kind of like the social psychology, because belonging, I think historically people have thought of, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, it's
Right.
food, clothing, shelter, and
Right.
everything
Yeah.
else comes after. But when you think about belonging, even if you go way back in prehistoric times, belonging was very much a first order need, right? If you weren't
Yeah.
part of the pack,
You're gonna
you're not
die.
going to be. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it's still true to some extent, right? For us to, belonging is very much a need that we need to cater to.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be exploring that whole thread.
Awesome.
The other thing that we want to do in terms of creating a sense of belonging is developing not only this shared collective experiences, which are very important, right? Somehow when you're in this concert, I mean, I still remember going to this Prince concert in Oakland in 1996 with four or five of my friends,
Yeah.
and in business school, and I forever feel connected to them.
Yeah. Sure. Because of the experience. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It
Yeah.
was one experience. And so shared experiences are great,
Yeah.
but also one thing that creates a sense of community is having a shared understanding of history, which
Yeah.
is something we lack,
Yeah. I
right?
love what you talk when even when you talked about you mentioned like these art forms or doing these things and it's an American thing.
Yeah,
I notice when you say that like the American, but part of me cringes of like the American. I just think of that
yeah,
thing.
mhm,
But what I'm getting from you is that you're expressing the America that I know too, where it is this
yes,
melting pot, where it's this new existence of harmony between
yes,
different cultures, and that's the could be the best part of the American
absolutely,
expression. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so I really like that. Um, what's some of the things that you have coming up? I know you guys are doing a lot of things with the museum, and what's some of the things that you're
Yes,
doing?
yes. So we have, unfortunately, so one of the things I'm super excited about is this year we got funded by the County of Santa Clara and also SV Creates through the X Factor grant to do a Hummingbird Festival, which is going to be an Ohlone festival that
Awesome.
showcases in a very participatory way living traditions of the Ohlone people. And,
Nice.
we felt like a lot of times people think about the Ohlone, they offer land and location. but we don't realize they are very much living amongst us, right? Even though, and we view the Ohlone and almost all indigenous communities through this lens of kind of the destruction of their culture.
Yeah.
But the truth is, despite against all odds, we have the Ohlone living amongst us, really trying to keep their traditions alive. So we work to get
Awesome.
funding to have this festival, which the culture bearers will be sharing things like regalia making, bone rattles or
Yeah.
skirts or whatever. So that was one that we had to shelve, but we are trying to kind of do some work online and then
Yeah.
bring it back in real life soon. And we were going to have these festivals at Mission Santa Clara and Montalvo and some places that have significance to the Ohlone.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's one. We also have, we are working with School of Arts and Culture and partnering with them to bring the very first Mosaic Silicon Valley Festival to the plaza.
Awesome.
And it will be the first festival that is entirely intercultural. So, in the performances will all feature works that we have commissioned to bring two or three different
Yeah.
art forms or cultures together.
Yeah.
But then in the plaza we will showcase kind of cuisine, arts, all the cultures that surround us. So
Yeah.
the idea is, we are going to reflect the true diversity of San Jose and Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
in a
That's awesome.
way. Yeah, so that is right now it's scheduled for April 1st and 2nd. We are hoping that we will still have
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Let the
And then
COVID.
there's absolutely. And then one of the things that we discovered with COVID, when we had to take everything online, is we are not trying to recreate the physical experience in some form online. We've just realized there's actually people that we can reach online that we would not be able to reach
Sure.
in
Yeah.
real life, right? So some of these conversations that we are having, for example, this coming Thursday, we have Love, Lost Life, which is an examination of Chicano, African American, and Vietnamese history in Santa Clara Valley
Yeah.
through music, right? Van An Vo, who is a fantastic artist, a Vietnamese traditional artist, she composed this work after interviewing, community leaders from these different communities, and it's our way of conveying the history of Santa Clara Valley and kind of highlighting some of the things that maybe people don't understand, the
Yeah.
Chicano movement, for example.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so we have that. We have a lot of stuff coming online, and we are going to change our name and work
Yeah.
on kind of
A lot of
getting that
new
word
stuff.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, that's
really
good.
exciting.
It makes me just realize too, is just a lot of times, when cultural kind of like experiences and art forms are presented, it's very much like, and this is from this part of the
Yeah,
world. I think what's so
yeah,
great about where we live is
yeah,
that what you're doing is actually, you're just actually opening up the doors of what's going on behind in the individual houses.
exactly,
It's not,
exactly.
it is from another part of the world, but the reality is this house, is eating this food, and this
Yeah,
next
yeah.
house right next to them is doing something different, and yet they're neighbors, right, and living in
Yes,
community. Yeah.
absolutely. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. So we did in Saratoga, we commissioned a work that was expressly intended to bring the Saratoga community together, which, in Saratoga, we have silos of white, Indian, Chinese communities,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
And they're getting increasingly siloed. The only things that seem to draw them together is when they're out there protesting some new development or, expressing their concern about school or,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so when I first moved here, I commissioned this work, and we had again all Americans. We had the Indian American sitar player who composed a piece for cello, and so we had Robert Howard who played the cello. We
Wow.
had
Awesome.
Shenshen Zhang who played the Chinese pipa with tabla for percussion, and they came together. But this is so. First of all, you couldn't just suss out. You couldn't say, okay, Arjun's going to play sitar and Shenshen's going to play pipa. No, it was all in harmony together. It was a concert. But the beautiful part, and this is what is so important, is that performance was uniquely American because these are people that are born and raised here. Typically, a sitar player or pipa player would not read music or write music, right?
Right.
Growing up here in America, these are all kids that grew up here, learned how to read and write music, were part of their orchestras, symphonies, what have you, and they were able to converse and remotely compose this and just get together once and play. It was so
Yeah.
beautiful,
That's great.
so moving, right? And they were able to talk about how their own practice related to others. And to me, it was such an aha moment because I cannot really envision any other place in this world where that kind of stuff can happen so naturally,
Right. Yeah.
right? That's why I want to say they're all American artists,
Yeah, that's
right?
great. Yeah.
Mm.
What would for you? What
And
would you say? What is your kind of like personal like mission? What do you feel like you're like called to do? I mean, like I think we can hear it throughout what you're talking about. You're
yeah,
very
I know you
passionate
pretty
about.
much heard it.
But
Yeah, yeah.
what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that I know this sounds really grandiose, but I would love to play a role in redefining um, in the minds of everybody in America what it means to be American.
Yeah.
What does American art mean? So that eventually, like my daughter, conferred the American title on Isabel
Yeah.
wasn't from
Yeah.
here. I would just want people to not presume that American means any one thing, right? And
Right.
that we can actually, I also want, I mean, I do worry a lot about this erosion of social cohesion
Yeah.
because a lot of us try to find community online. We try community among our own religion, our own people of certain origin.
Yeah.
But community for humans has to be rooted in place. Ultimately, we're physical beings, right? We
Yeah.
need to have a connection to the place. And I hope that at least in Silicon Valley, in some small way, I hope, over the next how many every years, I can feel like, okay, now I'm sensing there is a feeling of belonging that people have. Because,
Yeah.
we have 40% of the people that are born here that were not born here, they're born elsewhere. And then we have increasing numbers of people saying they don't see themselves living here in the future.
Right.
So if you're not from here, you don't have a common past, you don't see a common future, how are we going to create community? And I'm hoping that we can find ways, and with the help of organizations like SV Creates, like City of San Jose, Knight Foundation, which has been a
Yeah.
tremendous support to us. They've invested a very large amount in a small organization like us. School of Arts and Culture. All of these people, I truly feel like the love and kind of everybody's bought into this vision in San Jose. That's what is
Yeah.
so amazing to me. And I think we have an opportunity to be the standard bearers. You know how people always talk about Silicon Valley innovation? They
Yeah.
immediately think about high tech.
Right.
But we have an opportunity to innovate, to do some, really demonstrable innovation and community building
Yeah.
through the arts and through the humanities right here. And I hope I can play a small role in that.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I think you are doing that. And as I hear you speaking, it's kind of like, wow, it's like it seems like you've really found like the area where you belong, And I feel like,
Yeah, yeah, I do.
yeah, it's great. This the connectedness. So cool. Well, awesome.
Absolutely.
Where can people find out where's the best place for them to go to find out if they want to participate in one of the Mosaic
Yes.
events?
So you can go to the web at Sangam Arts, that SAN as in Nancy, GAM as in Mary, arts.org. You can find us online at Sangam Arts and also at Mosaic Silicon Valley on Facebook and Instagram, or you can send us an email, info@sangamarts.org. We would love to hear from people and, join us on this journey. I think we all can be ambassadors of this kind of notion of mosaic.
Yeah.
And thank you, Daniel. I
Sure.
really appreciate it. I know you had featured us in Content Magazine, and now to be part of this podcast, it gives us an important platform to get the word across. And it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you. I really love what you're doing, and I really appreciate it. So, and hopefully
Thank
I'll
you.
see you in person soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before long.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
Okay.
Daniel. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Visit our website to become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the local creatives. This episode's music is a piece commissioned by Sangam Arts and composed by Arjun Verma called Strings and Bow.